Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, February 7th, 2023, and you were tuned in for another episode of Your Healthy Java. As you may be able to tell, I am on the road, but the work continues and the importance of our health we still have to take care of while we're here with our partner, Massachusetts General Hospital, Office of Equity and Community Health. We have talked about heart health. We have talked about high blood pressure often, but not as in depth as we are today. We have a wonderful cardiologist who is with us this morning. We're going to bring her in a couple of seconds, but I want to ask you all to do me a favor when we share this information. And I know people go back and watch the after shows, but as you know, you can ask questions this morning about hypertension, high blood pressure. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about heart health, but there's nothing like the live interaction of asking the questions. And so though today we're going to have a brief, a little abbreviated, shorter session this morning at about 9:35, you will be able to ask questions. And so we can get all of the information, learn as much as we can about high blood pressure. We're going to learn what it is. We're going to learn if it's possible to prevent it. If not, we know that some cases it's hereditary. If you are dealing with it, we're going to learn about ways to treat it, possibly through medication, but look at some ways to treat it without medication. And we're also going to look at the fact of how minimally some stress may contribute to hypertension or high blood pressure. So without further ado, I can't go in and say hi to everyone this morning. I would like to bring in, and I believe because it's important to pronounce names and give our guests their just due and respect. So I believe I'm going to do this right. I did it well beforehand we got started, but this is Dr. Oyere Unama. I think I got it right. I did.
Nice job, Jimmy.
Oh, no, I got it right. I got it right. Good morning. And see, my blood pressure, I can already feel that I'm just not as anxious. See, we're already having an impact. Good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thank you, Jimmy. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm enjoying. You have a wonderful home there with the details of wood. That is awesome. Please say good morning to the audience. Introduce yourself, and we'll jump in maybe to a little bit of your background and what you do. But say good morning to the audience.
Absolutely. Good morning, Java with Jimmy audience. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning, and I look forward to our conversation today.
I think. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to introduce myself. Jimmy already did the honors. I'm Dr. Oyere Unama. I'm a board-certified cardiologist at Mass General Hospital. I did my training at Mass General several years ago. I moved away to Connecticut for a little while and just joined back at Mass General last month. So I'm really excited to be back and, obviously really excited to interact with you.
Absolutely. And so are we one of your first interviews since being back on top?
You are.
We kind of like some first things here in the Java Cafe. So awesome. Let me ask you, Dr. Unama, why did you go into cardiology? That is one of the, because I worked in medicine, cardiology is a very, it's a longer training period. And there are different subspecialties, but why did you choose cardiology?
Thanks, Jimmy. I think that's a great question. And I should mention that within cardiology, I'm actually a preventive cardiologist. It means that I work very hard to try to put myself out of a job and make sure that people don't end up with heart disease. Yes. So the reason I went into cardiology, Jimmy, really, when I was going through my training, I just found the heart to be very fascinating.
Yes.
Like it's very, very interesting. Maybe I should mention by way of background that my undergraduate degree is in engineering, and the heart felt very much like something that was a machine.
Yes.
Exactly like a machine. And so I understood it. I thought it was very interesting. I thought all the, conditions and diseases were very interesting. Plus, I also recognized that there was a really huge burden of heart disease in the US, in minority populations, and really all over the world. And that, I think, was the thing that really sort of drew me into cardiology.
I think it is so interesting, and I would go as far as to say, apropos, that you have an engineering background to go in cardiology. All right, so that is going to help us be able to, one, Dr. Onumah, what is hypertension, high blood pressure? In our community, we may just shorten it and say high blood.
Yes.
What really, in layman's terms, what is it?
Thanks, Jimmy. And I think that this is really, really important to understand. This is always a good place to start, to understand what blood pressure is, what high blood pressure is. And then when we start talking about some of the ways in which we treat it or what we need to do, then I think it makes more sense. So essentially, your blood pressure, it really just is the force against the heart arteries or the heart pipes that carry blood away from the heart. So when the heart pumps or squeezes, it squeezes blood into these heart arteries, and they carry it away from the heart to all the different parts of the body. So the blood pressure just refers to the force on those heart arteries as they're carrying blood. And if you think about it, when that force or pressure on the heart arteries is too high, which is what we call high blood pressure, then the heart itself has to work much harder to try to squeeze that blood through if the force is too high. And if you think about it, other parts of the body, like when the blood gets to your brain, if the pressure is too high, then it can cause damage in the brain, in the blood vessels in the brain. Same thing when it gets to your kidneys. If the pressure is too high, then it can damage the blood vessels in the kidney and lead to kidney failure and all sorts of other complications. So when we talk about high blood pressure, what we're saying is that in the arteries or the blood vessels or tubes that carry blood away from the heart, that force, pressure in those arteries is much higher than it needs to be. And if it sustains itself for a long time, it can cause a lot of damage.
So it's not just because I think a lot of times before, I spent some time working in medicine. When you hear about high blood pressure, one of the first things, and we'll talk a little bit about heart health, because the instrument or the main engineering component of
it's the engine. It's the engine of the whole body. Yeah.
And so a lot of people first attribute to the impact of high blood pressure immediately on the heart.
Yes.
But if I understood you right, and understanding that blood pressure and high blood pressure, thank you for making that so plain, it doesn't just impact the heart. It actually, because that engine, the blood goes through every part
of the body.
Cell, I learned something last night from a conference, is the cell, the tissue, the organ. And so, it just was interesting to hear that it can impact the kidneys and it can impact the brain. One question for you. There's high blood pressure, meaning that the force is too high, not what our doctors like to see, not what's good for the body. Is there a reverse of that to where there may not be enough blood flow? I've shared on the platform that, they're wondering now if I'm a little anemic. I've heard the term hypo, because another term, if I could just deviate, another term for high blood pressure is hypertension.
Hypertension, yes.
Okay. And then, so you can have something that's called hypotension. Can you just talk about that for 2 seconds? Because it's all related to the pressure of the blood flowing through, correct?
Absolutely. Okay. So, I mean, with the blood pressure, it's, kind of the Goldilocks situation. It's best when it's just right.
Yes.
That's not a good thing. And when the blood pressure conversely is too low, then, some people can have symptoms with that as well if the blood pressure is too low. So sometimes people feel lightheaded, or they have, other symptoms with it. So it can happen, Jimmy, that for some people, but that I think is a much smaller number of people
Yes.
that the blood pressure is too low. For the majority of people, and Jimmy, this thing is quite an epidemic, high blood pressure or hypertension. In the US alone, almost 30% of adults have high blood pressure based on how we define it. So we're looking at over, I think the last numbers are going to be well over 50 million adults with high blood pressure. And a vast number of people don't necessarily know that their blood pressures are elevated. So I agree with you. There's some people who are hypotensive, and you can have symptoms from that. But a vast majority of people, I will say, are on the other end of things where their blood pressures are too high.
Out of that, those are some very alarming numbers. Do you know by any chance, because one of the things that we've learned on this platform, that a lot of illnesses don't demonstrate themselves until a point to where you are in a process of really needing to be treated. We go to the doctor. They check our high blood pressure. Sometime there may be incidents where that day you're running to get to the doctor, a little anxiety. You made it, right after Thanksgiving, you had ham, bacon, and all that other stuff. How do they diagnose someone with hypertension?
Jimmy, I think that's a great question. The first thing I would have to say is it is important. This is something I teach my patients all the time, something that we call know your numbers. It is extremely critical that you know your number. For people who are, much younger, let's now focus just on adults, say you're between 18 and 39, we recommend that, you get your blood pressure checked at least once every couple of years. And you should know what that number is. I'll come back and talk about what numbers are normal, what numbers are high, and what numbers are very high. When you get to 40, you're older and wiser, you need to have that blood pressure checked every year. And you need to know that number. For what it's worth, you also need to know your cholesterol numbers. Yes. And I'd like you to know your A1C or diabetes numbers as well. But that all goes under the package of know your numbers. So you go to the doctor, you go in, they put the blood pressure cuff on your arm, they check your blood pressure. They usually give you two numbers. There's a top number, which is something we call the systolic number. You don't have to remember it, just remember it's a top number. And then there's a bottom number, which we call the diastolic blood pressure. So it's usually one top number over a bottom number. A normal blood pressure is anything less than 120 on the top number over 80 on the bottom number. So if you know your numbers and it's less than 120 over 80, great, your blood pressure is normal. But there are lots of things you need to do to keep that number in the normal range. You just can't take it for granted. And you still have to check it every year to make sure it is still in the normal range. Absolutely. If your blood pressure is between 121 on the top number and 130 on the top number still, then you're sort of in the group we say is pre-hypertensive, if you will. That number is not completely normal, but we want to start watching you closely and start, making the lifestyle changes that you need to make to try to bring your numbers down. And then that bottom number, if it's anywhere between 80 and 90. So 120 over 80, remember, anything less than that is normal. If your blood pressure, when it's measured, is greater than 130 on the top number and 90 on the bottom number, then we say you're hypertensive. That is the definition of having hypertension. So when you go to the doctors first, on the first day when we measure if it's high, we usually have you come back and measure it again, or we have you measure it at home. We typically don't just do it on one measurement. Because like you said, maybe you're running late, you're in Boston traffic, you couldn't find parking, you're running a little late for the appointment. So then, we'll go back and, remeasure that blood pressure at a different time point to see what it looks like, or have you measure it at home. But the most important thing is you have to know your numbers. Yes. You have to know what that number is, and you have to have it measured on a regular basis.
Okay. And that, when you say know your numbers, I know in medical terms, that's what they call your baseline. Yeah. So knowing your numbers, I'll be honest, when I go in and I'm in a like hypo, when they're saying it's like 118 over 70, I'm like, that's, they're like, oh, that's okay. But I'm like, because I stay good at around 120 over 80. So I know my baseline. So knowing your numbers is definitely important. And so people are diagnosed after a series of monitoring their high blood pressure. Let's say they go in for a checkup and it's 130 over 90 on a Monday. More than likely, they would be asked to maybe come back in with like a week?
Yeah, within a week or so, and then we recheck it. And if on your next check that blood pressure is still high, then we're able to make that diagnosis of you having high blood pressure, and then recommend the appropriate treatments or therapies. For a lot of people, treatment for high blood pressure, again, depending on your particular circumstances, will be medications to try to reduce the blood pressure. Jimmy, you mentioned something that was important when we were chatting earlier, which is that, high blood pressure is also known as the silent killer.
Yes, yes.
I think that is, critical, because unlike some other illnesses or diseases that you have, many times when your blood pressure is high, you don't even know it.
Yes.
You don't feel anything. Now, in some cases, if the blood pressure is very high, like the top number is 180, sometimes people will get a headache or, some other symptom. But for most people, they do not feel anything at all. And so the only time we know that you've had high blood pressure for a long time, if you've not been measuring or checking, can be sometimes when you come in with, some adverse outcome. And the thing we worry about the most with high blood pressure, I mean, if you don't feel anything, I don't have any symptoms, it's just a number, why should you care? I think most people, that's a fair question. People say, well, why should I care? If I'm not feeling anything, why bother about this blood pressure thing? But like I said, there's some really, really dangerous things that can happen if you have high blood pressure over a long time. So one, remember I said the heart has to work much harder if your blood pressure is high, and that can lead to heart attacks.
Yes.
Or it can lead to weakening of the heart muscle. Think about it. This pump is needing to work extra hard, and that can weaken the heart itself and lead to something we call heart failure. The second thing that can happen that is really dangerous with high blood pressure is that it can lead to strokes, right? Your blood pressure is so high in the brain, and sometimes you can have the little blood vessels in the brain, they can actually rupture or burst. And that can cause a significant stroke. And we know all the different consequences that can happen with a stroke. Another really important consequence of high blood pressure that's not treated over a long time, and this is something we see a lot, particularly in, African-American population, is that over a long time, that sustained blood pressure can lead to kidney damage, eventually kidney failure, and lead to people going on dialysis or, needing kidney transplants.
So can I ask one quick question? Because a lot of times when we hear about kidney failure in African-American communities, I believe, and you tell me if I'm wrong, most of the time, the number one, they attribute it to diabetes.
Yes.
But my familiarity with just hearing about this. And so if someone is dealing with diabetes and high blood pressure, Is that almost a double whammy?
That is absolutely a double whammy. And you know what? Those two things tend to travel together because a lot of the factors, we're talking now of, unhealthy diets, sometimes lack of exercise, obesity, particularly. Those things travel together. Some of the same underlying things that lead to diabetes, also contribute to high blood pressure. And the combination of those two, really increases dramatically the risk for some of these conditions.
It is we have someone here, Tasha Carrington, who's a friend and sister. She says, I have both diabetes and high blood pressure. And so this is Natalie Johnson from The Office is on, and she is saying, thanks for these very clear connections you're making with these conditions. And these are the things that I think it's why it's so important that we have these spaces, because a lot of people may not make the correlation. And I mean, I never would, when you mention that, the flow to the high blood pressure could impact the kidneys and whatnot, for a quick second, I just thought, but most of the time people just think it's, from diabetes. And so, and we learned that these two typically travel together. Now, is that morely within the African-American community or just in general?
It is more so within the African-American community. Okay. Jimmy, I talked to you about the statistics and the numbers in the US in general. In, African-American populations, the incidence of high blood pressure is significantly higher than, in Caucasians and also even in, Latino populations, although Latino populations also have an incidence that is higher than Caucasians. And more so when you think about high blood pressure or hypertension, again, particularly in African-Americans, it tends to occur at a younger age than you would get, with other populations. So we're having more high blood pressure and more hypertension at younger ages and more complications that are due to high blood pressure, in our particular populations. Why is this? It's not necessarily, Jimmy, all or related to some biological, conditions. I think there's a lot of what we call, and I know you probably have talked about this on the show, a lot of the social determinants, that lead to this. It's things like, not having availability, living most of us in food deserts where there's not enough availability of fresh foods. It's, not being in environments where people can, walk or exercise or do physical activity. Jimmy, it's a lot of stress, right? We've talked about the, psychological stresses, racism, structural racism, the things that people are dealing with on a daily basis. It's, the socioeconomic differences, in our communities that make access to care, more complicated, access to medications, a little bit more difficult. These are all the things that sort of coalesce to translate into a higher incidence of high blood pressure, in our communities at younger ages and with more complicated or more serious side effects than you might get otherwise. So I think this is why, our conversation is really, really important. It's critical for us to know that this condition is a major, major killer in our communities, to understand what it means and to start to understand what it is that we need to do as individuals, as a community, to start to address this.
There's so much, and I hate to today, because this would be the one session that if you had the time, we could go for 90 minutes and I, travel. But there were a few things you said there that I need to extract and highlight. One, you said that younger people are dealing with this more.
Yes.
But my impression of you is you're intentional about words. Having it younger versus being diagnosed younger, because one of the things is, as younger people, we tend to think that we are invincible and we may not be keeping up with our healthcare at a young age. How important, if you could speak to every millennial, young person between the ages of 21 and 30, what would you say to them right now about the importance of their health in general, but specifically around this hypertension.
Exactly what I said earlier. You need to know that number. You need to know that number. If you're between 18 and 39, you need to know that number, and you need to have it rechecked at least once every 2 years. It's the same as knowing your, I don't know, your Twitter or IG account. I need to walk up to be like, what's your blood pressure? Oh, it was 118/72 the last time I checked. You need to know that number, because if you don't know it, you don't, again, remember, you're not having symptoms until something happens, until you have a stroke or heart failure or your kidneys start to go. You won't have symptoms. So it's important that you're being seen, you're checking these numbers. Even if you don't go to your doctors, you can usually find the blood pressure cuff at, Walgreens or CVS. Sometimes there are health fairs, in churches, in, farmers markets, in different places where you can just go in and get your blood pressure checked.
Jasmine from, she's actually in the SUDS clinic there. My Roxbury peeps, if you need consistent free blood pressure checks, every Wednesday at our MGH Community Care Van is on Blue Hill Ave across the street from Merengue, every Wednesday 1 to 5. And some of the pharmacies actually have stations. If you can't purchase, you can actually go in and get it checked. I just wanted to highlight, because when I heard you say specifically that young people are dealing with it or have it, and we refer to the fact that it's a silent killer, they may not know. And Heidi just said, when we're young, we think we're a bullet. So I just really wanted to pull that part out. One of the other things I wanted to ask, what are some non-medication, non-pharma ways that we can prevent, or if diagnosed, that we can treat high blood pressure? What are 3 examples that we can? I know what one of them are. Keyword.
Jimmy, let me get the medication question out the way, which is, if you are prescribed blood pressure medications by your healthcare provider, important and critical that you take those medications, you stay on it, no changes on the medications unless, instructed by your healthcare provider. So some of us are going to need medications to treat our blood pressure. And if that's you, it's important that you take those medicines. But there are also a lot of things that you can do, in addition to medications, if you're taking them, or to prevent high blood pressure. Highlight 3 things, maybe 4. One is diet. The main thing I want to double click on in the diet is our sodium intake, right? So we have a recommended amount, about 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day per the CDC. And it's important to understand that the sodium or salt intake is not, most of it is not what you put on your food, right? That's not where the major problem is. Yeah, that's a problem. Don't put too much salt on your food. But a lot of it comes from things that are already, all the things that we're buying in the supermarket, processed foods. Let's take, for instance, Jimmy, if you have like a turkey sandwich, there's sodium or salt in the bread.
Yep.
There's sodium in the cheese. There's a lot of sodium in the turkey. There's sodium in the mustard. In fact, if you add up just a regular turkey sandwich, you're using at least 70% of your daily recommendation just at lunch on your turkey sandwich. You didn't have dinner or breakfast or any added salts. So I think that that's critical. It's, paying attention, eating more fresh fruits, and vegetables. The stuff you cook at home, for yourself is going to be way healthier than the stuff you're buying, in the restaurants or fast food. Think about it. They got to make it salty so that it appeals to everybody's taste. Yeah, that's right. So they can sell it, it contains a lot of salt. So diet is critical, and particularly, the salt or sodium content in our diet. Second thing I have to double click is physical activity and exercise. So high blood pressure is also linked to obesity. We're not going to go into all of that, but it's important that, you have regular physical activity. We recommend about 30 minutes every day or 150 minutes a week. It can be walking 15 minutes in one direction and walking back. And you don't have to be in the gym, lifting weights, running marathons, but you need to move your body consistently, every day. We already talked about the screening. And I think, Jimmy, that, stress is also important. I think that stress, we live with a lot of stresses, around us, be it just in the day to day or in our minority communities, a lot of, additional, social stresses. So I think finding important and, critical ways to address and manage that stress, healthy ways. So if you manage your stress by smoking, that is a no-no. That's an unhealthy way to manage that stress. But, either, meditation, getting together with family, exercise can be a good way of managing stress, counseling for some of us. I think that that's also something that is important. If you're thinking about strategies and, non-medical ways in which to try to address high blood pressure or hypertension. But again, let me say that if you're prescribed medication, it is critical that you stay on your medicines every day, not some days when you feel like your blood pressure is high, you take it, and then not on other days.
Let's just also name, and this is a for the patients that are really trying and struggling. And you mentioned a couple of pharmacies, but unfortunately, within Boston and within communities of color, some of these corporation big pharma companies have decided to close. So some of our patients and some of your patients and clients, it has been very interesting for them, to keep up with it. So I just wanted to name that. So today we doing pretty good. We have covered a full understanding of what high blood pressure or hypertension is. We've learned about the outcomes, negative outcomes if it's not addressed. And one of the things is it can impact rather your brain. It could possibly lead to a stroke. It could impact your kidneys and possibly lead to kidney failure. And it's just, there's a few other things there that I'm aware of that hypertension does as well. And we may have some, well, I will ask that later, but there's an impact specifically with the cisgender male.
Yes,
correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
Just talk there for about 30 seconds, please, for the brothers that are in the room.
Yeah, so absolutely. So again, sustained high blood pressure, can lead in some men to problems with erectile dysfunction, right? Because there are also blood vessels there. And when you have that sustained, high pressure in there, you can lead to damage in the blood vessels and lead to erectile dysfunction. So that's absolutely one of the other. Remember, all the different organs are affected by, sustained high blood pressure.
And we also learned, I just wanted to park right there for that, because I think it's important that we keep that in mind. Young people and men, we typically tend not to prioritize often our health. And then, mothers dealing and single moms and 2 and 3 jobs. And so there is the balance of life, but, and I was in a virtual conference last night. If we don't take care of ourselves and make ourselves a priority, we're no good, to anyone else. And so I just wanted to mention a couple of other ways here.
Jimmy, I just want to highlight something while we're talking about that, to say, and it's not the focus of today's talk, but, it's Heart Health, it's Black History Month, that, even among our young women, right? For young women, especially young women who are pregnant or, thinking about getting pregnant, there are conditions, particularly preeclampsia, that are related to high or increased blood pressures, in the peripartum or around the time of delivery, that can be incredibly dangerous. In fact, cardiovascular conditions like preeclampsia or high blood pressure are the leading cause of maternal mortality, especially again amongst African Americans, Latinos here in the US. That's a whole separate, kind of conversation.
Yes.
But I did want to highlight that because it is also very important, in that population.
In that population of those that are expecting, at age,
pregnant, yes, young women, in that, in pregnancy, particularly for some people in the later trimesters or third trimester of pregnancy and around delivery.
this is, I think, another point to reiterate the fact that if you're, either, whatever your lifestyle is, and you're thinking about getting ready to conceive, young people need to pay attention to their health in general. But if there's some upcoming intentionality, and for the men as well, because they want to make sure that they can not dysfunction. So with that being said, Dr. Onuma, we wanted to also highlight 3 non-medical ways that we can, try to address or prevent, and is paying attention to sodium and salt intake, read the labels, also physical activity. 30 minutes a day is the recommendation, or 150 minutes a week, however you're able to work it out and not cause yourself stress trying to get to the gym 5 days a week and it doesn't work for your schedule. So we want to, can I ask this? Do you agree that we need to make realistic, healthy goals that we can stick to for life versus these, we talked about it a few weeks ago, first of the year, birthday, summer's coming, I got to get my body together. Do you agree that we need to make sustainable, life-changing type of goals in our diet, in physical activity? Yes?
Yes, Jimmy, I couldn't agree more. And, when I counsel my patients, I say, you make incremental changes. It might be the change for today is I will look at labels, or the change for today is, rather than eating out 4 times a week, I would do it 3 times. I think it's more difficult when people go, I eat out 5 days a week, I'm now not going to do it ever again. It is difficult sometimes to sustain those very radical changes. But once you start to make incremental changes, you've not been exercising, maybe you can walk 5 minutes. Maybe next week it's 10 minutes, but you do it in a way that it becomes a lifestyle. And then that's something that you can sustain over time. And that's when you really start to see the benefits of those lifestyle changes if it's something that you've done over time. So I couldn't agree more with you. Make smaller changes, incremental, but make them in such a way that they're things that you can sustain over time. It's a lifestyle and not just, a fad.
Yep, absolutely. As Heidi said, we're going to get ready to, we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but I wanted to this is a question you kind of answered. And I wanted to say to Ms. Teresa that she said, what is considered low and or dangerous? I'm consistently at 90/69 since my early 30s. She knows her baseline. Nice. And so for her, if that's her baseline,
it's perfect. If that's your baseline, and, again, people live in different places. If you're 90/69, you don't have any symptoms. It doesn't, cause you any issues. In fact, the lower, again, up to a certain extent is, probably better and more protective. So Teresa, if that's your number and, you have absolutely no symptoms or issues with that, that's perfectly fine.
Absolutely. Heidi is asking, what is the best time of day to measure blood pressure? I just wanted, as you're answering questions and we're taking them, I just wanted to say, you have not been examined as a patient. And so this is general answers and response, and just the doctor has not been able to examine you. So these are sort of general standardized responses to questions.
Absolutely. Heidi, I advise my patients to try to take the blood pressure about the same time every day. Okay. And my recommendation is either you do it first thing in the morning, when you get up before the world starts, or you do it again late at night, end of the day as you're winding down for the day, before you go to bed. The blood pressure is not a stable thing. It changes throughout the day, right? Yes. It goes up and down and tends to be higher, obviously, during the day when we're more active and moving around and doing lots of things. So my recommendation would be try to do it same time of day to have some consistency and ability to compare, since blood pressure changes throughout the day. And my recommendation is usually first thing in the morning before the craziness of the day starts, or at the end of the day before bed.
Okay. I'm just going to make sure to see if we have any more questions. There are a lot of good comments there. people are setting up now to meet up with the band and figure out alternative. Jasmine is in here doing outreach. They are working on extending hours. So Tasha, please go ahead and DM Jasmine. If you all can't reach each other, Tasha, inbox me and I'll get you two connected. This is awesome. I'm just checking to see if we have any more questions. Sleeping. Can you, before we get ready to wrap up, can you just talk about how important sleep is to, and I'm going to go ahead and don't do well, at sleep hygiene, as we call it.
Yeah. So sleep is very, very, very important. And, again, I hear you. I'll put myself out there. I could do better with my own sleep hygiene. We could all do better. But yes, absolutely. It is one of those things. We always talk about, diet, exercise. You hear the same thing, from your doctors, but sleep is important. Sleeping consistently, as an adult, you're, 6 to 9 hours, making sure you're, going to bed at a consistent time, making sure you have good sleep hygiene. We all get so distracted by our screens and, everything else that we're doing with that. So I agree that, sleep is very, very important. And you can see the effect of, lack of sleep cumulatively over time, I think, in, worsening blood pressure and, blood pressure control issues. So absolutely. I didn't mention that before, but I would put that in the list of things that, you would need to do and pay attention to for blood pressure control.
Okay. I don't see as many more. I don't see any more questions. A lot of feedback and folks are enjoying this. And unfortunately, some folks are referring to the fact that, as I mentioned, that for some of our folks, there are issues with the pharmacy, so that's real. We want to credit people that are doing their best to call for the refills, to order it, and then there are issues. And I have a family member that I often have to advocate for. So I definitely understand that.
And Jimmy, it's something, yes, there's absolutely the things that we can do as individuals. But, you're right. There's a lot of systematic or systemic things that we need to be doing, from our role in the healthcare system, in our communities, in our local, state, and federal levels, to address some of these issues. So I don't want to give the impression that it's just there are things you can do as an individual, but there are absolutely things that we can do, in the health system. And I think there are things that we are doing, through MGH, community health and, Office of Equity, to try to see if we can address some of these gaps, in the community. So I completely agree that there are things that need to be done. And hopefully we can all continue to work on all of these things to improve our health as a collective.
Absolutely. This is, and I say this a little bit here often, but the information just keeps getting better and better because we're building I guess just a cadence to where we're giving people information, but also helping them and encouraging them to prioritize their health. We've marched, we've rallied, we've talked about issues of race and equity, but in order to benefit or reap the benefits, we need to be here. Healthy to survive. And so, Dr. Onuma, I appreciate you so much. I would really, at some point, maybe love to have you back and more, and maybe figure out face-to-face and a live audience and really have a real conversation about, just heart health. And we haven't even went into the trauma that lives within our DNA, that contributes as well. And so any closing remarks or anything that we did not cover that you wanted to share?
No, Jimmy, I just want to close by thanking you, for providing this, very, very important platform, and, thanking the audience for the chance to be here. Again, this is all of us and all of community effort in order to kind of, keep our health in general and our heart health in particular. So if you don't know your number, this is my closing, make sure you know it. Today, next time I see you, I'm going to have to ask you what your numbers are.
Mine is 180 over it uses 120 over 80 rather. So I'm
Nice
pretty
job.
good. When it deviates, I'm looking at the MA. I'm like, can you do that again just to be sure? Thank you so much. I know you have to get ready for patients and whatnot. Thank you, and we will definitely be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Listen, everyone, that was, and everybody is saying it here, it's clear, concise information, and that is our intent and what we need to do. All right, folks, tomorrow morning, Boston Waterfront Coalition, Coalition for Resistant and Inclusive Waterfront will be with us. There may be an announcement tomorrow. So tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank all of you for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Y'all pray for my safe travel, uninterrupted, no drama, no luggage loss, return to Boston. Y'all have a good day. Thank you all so much.